This is Sister. Sister, can you see me?
Yes.
All right.
All right, I'm going to put His Eminence on.
Yes, can you see us? Can you see all of us, Sister?
Yes.
I think so.
Oh, I hear his voice, Your Eminence. How are you?
Very well, thank you, Mario. Very well.
Well, Merry Christmas, buon anno, as we usually say, right?
Good. Happy New Year. I hope you had a good Christmas.
Yes, thank you very much. And so here we are in Houston, and I had trouble bringing the priest back in because outside is 22 degrees, sunny, and they said, oh, we should do it outside. And I said, no, let's come back inside. And it's an honor and a pleasure for me. This is my fourth cohort, so this is our fourth class of our master program in ecclesial administration and management. And the priests here today, they come from 14 different dioceses in the United States, including one priest, Your Eminence, that came from Guam. He has no idea what's his name. He doesn't remember how he got here, coming from Guam through Japan, San Francisco, but he's within us. And again, it's an honor and a pleasure for me. And you have the floor. We want to hear from you, and then I'm sure we will have a few questions for you. And thanks again, Your Eminence.
Thank you, Mario. Fathers, I don't know whether there are any brothers. Look, I realize that most of what I might say usefully will be in response to questions, but I want to talk just for 10 minutes on a spread of issues, and then I'll hand it over for questions. Obviously, your studies are a very good thing, humanly speaking and religiously, because we all have a secular duty to manage resources well, efficiently, and to prevent corruption. And on top of that, of course, we also have a sacred responsibility for money and goods that are given to God and given for religious purposes. Well, as you're all at postgraduate level, and I would presume probably all or most of you are already involved in church administration, I presume that you're well aware of the fascination, the allure of money to most people. And as well as that, the temptation that money offers to some people. So there must always be precautions in place. In my own very limited experience, I got off to a flying start because in one of my earliest parishes, it was discovered that the altar boys were regularly robbing the collection. That wasn't my problem here in Rome, but I was surprised how much I enjoyed my work. I hadn't worked full-time with money before I came here. I found it quite fascinating. I was well trained in the basics, probably by people like yourself, by finance managers, by senior financiers who were on their boards in dioceses and universities and in aid agencies. So one very basic point I might make is to urge you as executives to get hold of the very best talent available for your finance board, the very best talent available financially and also from a Catholic point of view. Not all your finance board has to be Catholic, but a majority has to understand what the Catholic Church is about. Otherwise, their priorities will be quite different from church priorities. On a finance board, I think most of the members should be experts. I don't think I could envisage any situation where most of your finance board should be clergy or religious. On that board, very obviously, you need good accountants, managers, and administrators. These are essential. People who can count are necessary, but unfortunately, they're not enough. So if you have a patrimony in your diocese or order or parish, and please God you do, or you are working towards having one, as well as accountants, it's very useful to get hold of people who are good at making money honestly. We don't want people who could make money in the wrong sorts of ways, but some people are much better at developing a patrimony, developing a portfolio, seeing it's efficient than those people who are just managing the day-to-day finances. Now, I would urge you to, and I presume this won't be the case, if by some mischance it is, if your superior or bishop doesn't really understand money, then I would urge you to train him. I was trained by the finance personnel that I worked with. I've spoken at what are called the baby bishops courses here in Rome, and I've said that every bishop has the responsibility to understand basic economics. So every superior, religious, parish priest, bishop should be able to understand what you're doing as a finance administrator, and even better than that, every bishop should be able to understand whether you're doing it well, or especially able to recognize if you're doing it badly. And you can encourage the bishops in this direction. I remember in a very fraught situation where we had enormous troubles, the senior churchman came in and said, "Look, I'm afraid I don't understand anything about money." And I thought that was an unfortunate start, because I think every thief in the district rejoiced that the chief executive wasn't on top of it. The financial considerations are never the primary consideration for a church. You've always got to consider where you are financially, but you don't do things just simply to make a profit or because it will be advantageous financially. And a parallel sort of consideration is that sometimes you can find religious superiors who are notoriously slow to invest in intangibles, in things spiritual, in a religious program. For example, paying for chaplains at universities. And the whole, though they won't generally say this, every instinct of theirs is geared to putting money perhaps into a building where you can see it and see it for generations. The church suffers from financial maladministration. The church is suffering at the moment from this, and the story isn't over. I have a theory that we are coming to the end in this cycle of history for the scandals on pedophilia. I think our enemies have exhausted that vein. I think we've pretty basically got our act together in many, many parts of the world. Our enemies will be looking for other opportunities, and certainly if there is financial maladministration, that's going to be too easy a target, too easy a weapon. I'd like to make a very basic point. A poor church can help no one materially. A poor church might be able to give great spiritual leadership, consolation to the poor, but it won't be able to provide material help. Capital and reserves are very necessary, if only to pay our expenses. You cannot keep going year after year paying out more than is coming in. That's a very rudimentary common sense thing. And I like to say that we don't know how many people are going to hell, but we do know when we're losing money, and we do know when we're going broke. And it's important to realize that. Margaret Thatcher, who was Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, very much a capitalist, she pointed out that if the Good Samaritan hadn't had some money put aside as capital, he wouldn't have been able to leave money to look after the traveller who was robbed. And of course, that is absolutely true. And my final thought, I said I'd only speak for 5 minutes, is from Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa of Calcutta. Most of you seem to be clergy, all of you perhaps. Mother Teresa said that the two greatest challenges for priests are sex and money, and she said money is the greater challenge of those two. Before I came to work in Rome, I would have been a little bit inclined to doubt her wisdom, but I think I now agree with her. So that's as much as I would like to say. As I said, a random collection of thoughts, and I'm quite happy to try to answer your questions.
Thank you, Your Eminence. This is extremely important, and you are remarking exactly what we've been already discussing, and this week it's mainly accounting and crisis management. 404 days of solitary confinement, more than 4,000 letters that you received from friends and supporters. And at a certain point in your prison journal that I read, and I'm looking forward to read the second volume, at a certain point, and I'm going to break the ice with the first question, you said this, and I quote, "I understand a little bit better that suffering can bring growth." End of your quote. Can you please explain or maybe elaborate what you really meant with that? Thank you.
Well, it's a, I think it's a fundamental Christian teaching. I helped put together a new religious education program, No Worship and Love. And at the end of it, I listed 4 basic teachings, which I hoped the students would get. There is one God who loves us. There is one Son of God, our Redeemer. The next bit's a little bit sensitive. There is fundamentally one church led by the Pope, bishops, and priests. And Jesus said, repent and believe. I now think we should add something about suffering, because we believe that we are redeemed by Christ dying on the cross as the way to resurrection. And I think it's one of the basic points that separates us from the secularists. They have no theory of suffering. There's no room for redemption in the secular approach to suffering. So when the church comes into bad times, it's not necessarily entirely bad for the church. By confronting difficulties, by suffering, we can move forward. So that's, I suppose that also applies to financial scandals. They're very unpleasant. We've got to completely avoid them if we can, but where they occur, we've got to try to learn from the mistakes that were made and try to prevent them happening again.
Yes, I'm very grateful for what you said, and I'm going to do a follow-up on the question before I'll give to some of the fathers here. You also write at a certain point, first of all, I love that our common friend, George Weigel, at the beginning of his endorsement, he says, this prisoner's journal should never have been written. That's how he starts, okay? And then he goes down to say that he's an exaltation of you as a model of priestly character. And you say at a certain point, Your Eminence, that, and I quote again, every now and again, I felt that the forces against me were using deceptions or creating confusions and enhancing obscurity. End of the quote. Yes, in the financial misconduct, and we are going into forensic accounting later on this week, we see that often, that the devil comes and tempts the human person, okay? Now, when you say that I felt that the forces against me were using deception, can you define or let us understand what you mean with the word I felt, please?
Well, I'm not one of those people who go around quickly identifying persons or activities as being activities of the evil one, of the evil spirit. But I believe in the spirit of evil. I believe in the devil. Sometimes the spirit of evil is manifestly at work. Occasionally, once in a while, we might feel that as in almost in an emotional sense, a spiritual sense, as well as intellectually. I think we've got to be very, very careful because we might be misled by our feelings. But just to conclude with one thought from the economics, I think evil feeds on incompetence and muddle. So if there is financial incompetence, if nobody really knows where you are, whether you're a diocese or a parish or a religious order or the Vatican, where no one can say, are we making money, are we losing money, how much do we have invested, what sort of return are we getting on our investments, if the methodology is muddled, inefficient, these are golden opportunities. Nearly always it's only a few people, for clever, crooked people to exploit the ignorance and the confusion. So
yes,
we used to say cleanliness is close to godliness, but orderliness is, I think, a good basis for godliness.
yes. Okay, fathers, anybody has a question for His Eminence? Yes? If you come in the middle so you can see better, say who you are.
Your Eminence, my name is Father Bill Kennedy. I'm from the Archdiocese of Boston. Can you tell me, you mentioned incompetence is really a problem. Can you tell me why the bishops are so reticent then to include this kind of education in formation and in the seminary? It seems as though it's only when someone's named a pastor that they may go to a 2 or 3 day workshop before they're put in charge. And 35 years ago, I was told that my vocation needed to be re-examined when I brought this up in Boston at the seminary, that this was a very lacking part of the education that we were preparing people for. So whatever insights you could give, I'd appreciate.
Well, anyhow, Father Bill, you were right. You were you were completely right, and you were right years ago, and you're right now. I have recognized that need, so that when I was in Rome, I encouraged one of the universities here. I said we need to put on something for the people who are studying in Rome, so that they can do a number of units in these matters. And the University of Santa Croce, to my considerable surprise, acted on it very, very quickly. And they too have had 4 cohorts of people. They do their course part-time. But I think you just need to keep saying that to your bishops, need to keep saying it to the seminary rectors. It's not the most important thing, but it is one thing that is important. Now, most seminarians already have a university degree. Quite a number of them would have business experience, but some certainly wouldn't. So I think tactfully and gently, just keep asking and keep spreading the message.
Another question? Yes, can you please come, Father Adam, say who you are?
Greetings to you, Your Eminency, Father Adam from the Diocese of St. Augustine, Florida. I was praying for you, Your Eminency, during probably your darkest time when you have been in prison. And I've been reading a lot about different issues in the Vatican. And my question is Pope Francis going to implement any policy preventing the scandals? No, it's happened before it happened again. And if there is, I know there is a advising board, financial advising board, who advises Pope Francis, yes. So one more time, my question is if Pope Francis is going to do anything to prevent those things before happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Adam. First of all, thank you for your prayers. I do really appreciate them, and many, many people who prayed and suffered for me. Look, Pope Francis has already done a lot. I might have wished he'd done a little bit more, but we do now have a council for the economy. We now have a secretariat for the economy. So in our time, we introduced modern procedures, methodology, the international methodology. We did some quite extraordinary things. We discovered by a systematic counting that there was 1.3 billion euros worth of funds that were not on the books, that the different departments were keeping for a rainy day. So that represented quite a bit. I know you will find this remarkable, but during my time, it was the first time in the Vatican they had prepared a budget before the financial year for the year coming up. It was the first time it was done. It was often wrong because it was done incompetently. Back in Sydney, where I was, we would have our budget and our expenditure, and we would compare expenditure against the budget about 10 times a year, I think. We managed to check that once. On one occasion during the year, during my time in the Vatican. So this gives you some idea of how rudimentary the situation is, and obviously how open to abuse. One of the, just a couple of concluding points. One of the recommendations we had made, which is the Holy Father has just accepted, is that the patrimony, the investments of the Holy See be consolidated, and there'd be a small expert board of lay expert financiers who would recommend just how the Vatican patrimony is to be invested so we get a decent return on it. I knew one agency, it had 300 properties and it made 60,000 for the year. It was very difficult to find out the value of the properties we had that were available for renting. And of course, if you don't know what the value of your property is, you can't estimate whether you're getting a decent return. The first tranche of members of the Council for the Economy have moved on, and so the Council for the Economy has 8 cardinals and 7 lay people. I think 6 of the new ones are women. Now I'm sure we don't have too much of a good thing, but these women are enormously qualified. Quite a number of them have run their own senior executives in banks, and so I'm very optimistic that they will insist that the reform process continues. So Pope Francis has done quite a bit. He has promised to do more. You might have read that he's taken away financial authority from the Secretariat of State. I'm fully in favor of that because they refused to allow auditors in to examine what they were doing. And you all know, as experienced administrators, is that whenever people refuse to go on holidays, or whenever people will not allow the auditors in, that's a good reason to redouble your efforts to make sure the auditors do get in.
Thank you. Do we have one more question before we will let them go? Please, Father. Or a couple.
Your Eminence, my name is Father Rick Kramer. I am with the Ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter here in Houston. This is less about finances and more asking for your spiritual reflection and guidance. I read that during your time in prison that you were not able to celebrate the Mass. And I cannot, in my own priestly identity, imagine a more profound sense of suffering than not being able to celebrate the Mass. And yet, while there is no comparison, I think there is some solidarity that can be expressed, especially during this COVID time, where so many of us find ourselves facing restrictions about the Mass, and so many of our faithful are unable to come to Mass and to receive the Lord in the sacrament. I wonder if you would reflect for us just a little bit on that experience in your priestly identity, and if you could share words of encouragement that we might pass on to the faithful during these times. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Father Rick. I think the situations are similar. And my time in prison has convinced me that one of the first things we have to do when we find ourselves in a difficult situation is to admit that we are there, that we're not somewhere else. We can't be somewhere else. The COVID pandemic exists. There is no alternative but to following and respecting the regulations of the government, because they're there to enhance health. And so it was in jail. Obviously, in a parish, the COVID pandemic is not an excuse for a priest to do nothing, but for the priest in his parish to try in every way that is possible to get the mass out, to get the message out, to maintain contact with his people. I was able to receive communion once a week. I think I went to 3 or 4 masses during my time. They managed to get special permission for a priest to come in to celebrate Mass. I realized I couldn't do anything about that. There was no point in my lamenting that too much. I knew God was still with me. I knew I could still pray. I was blessed because I had my breviary with me from the very first night. That would have been if I didn't have a prayer book of some description, that would have been a terrible, terrible difficulty. But they were humane on that point, and that very much helped me to pray. But as you said, the situations are parallel. They are situations of deprivation, and we just have to do what we can. We realize that God is always with us. We realize that providence is always at work, even when we can't see what on earth the good God is up to. But one of the great advantages of the Christian doctrine of heaven and hell, it means that the scales of justice will balance out in eternity. And that's an enormous consolation. And that's a consolation that is not open to people without faith. Like me, you would have all celebrated funeral masses where most of the congregation are deeply believing. And they're radically different from a funeral mass where the congregation really doesn't believe in life after death. So if you know God loves us, he's interested in us, that he's just, that's a great consolation, even when you're confronting financial chaos or trying to clean up some disaster or some elementary piece of nonsense that shouldn't be going ahead and you're unable to stop. But so anyhow, may God bless what you're doing. I'm sure it's a real service, and I hope your work goes from strength to strength.
Your Eminence, thank you very much. Let's let Your Eminence. Thank you very much. And God bless you and have a wonderful week. Thanks again, Your Eminence.
Good, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.